host if you. Thanks, Andrew.
Oh, people are arriving.
I'll keep letting them in. Hi, everyone. If you're joining us now, you might like to start by acknowledging the Aboriginal land that you're coming from today in the chat. And you might also, here's something that you can do, is you might like to put some kind of system that you're thinking about in your head or some kind of situation. Just really simple in the chat as well. So that's two things. I know it's a bit complex for Friday, two things, but that's what we're trying to do. Go for it. We've still got people joining in, so we'll probably, if that's okay with you, Andrew, we'll probably start at 12:05. And Julie.
Sounds good, Brian. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're doing well. We are expecting a lot of people here today.
As I said, as soon as they heard you were coming, Julie, they just crowded in.
It would be really nice if everybody's name that they're coming through on was actually their name rather than a number or iPhone or something like that.
So I can no longer be known as Zed. Is that right, John?
No, Zed's not good. J's not good.
Okay, so just for those people that just arrived, we're acknowledging the Aboriginal land that we're coming from today in the chat. And we're thinking about some kind of system or situation. And this is basically so you can have something in your head. Opposed to me, I just keep vacuous things in my head. I don't think you can say that, actually, keeping vacuous things in your head. Anyway, I said it. It looks as though there's still people coming in, so it looks as though it'll be a minute or two more before we start. So, just hang around. If anyone's got some incredibly funny jokes, now's the time to come forward. And for those people that are just coming in, what we're doing now is acknowledging the Aboriginal land that we're joining the meeting today from in the chat. And we're also just putting in a system or something that we're thinking about today that might apply to systems theory, a situation, just so that it's to prompt you to be actively engaged in this discussion. So you can think, okay, I know it's 12:04, which is not quite 12:05, but I think I might start because we only have an hour. Welcome, everyone. Sorry, Julie.
Good time to start. I'll keep my eye on the room to make sure people are admitted.
Great. Welcome, everyone. We're the Systems SIG. And so this committee of 4 people, Cara couldn't join us today because she's actually in Sydney doing other things. So the committee is me, Julie, and Andrew. We often get together and we talk about the systems and how systems can be applied and used in evaluation. And then we sort of try and present our ideas, or we get other people to present ideas as well. And today, we're extremely lucky because Andrew has applied his huge brain to thinking about what does it mean to use systems in evaluation. And he's put together, in the latest terminology, a minimal viable product for using systems. If you haven't seen it, maybe Andrew, you just want to pop it in the chat for everyone. And the other thing that we might put in the chat, and I'll do it during the meeting, is that Michael Jackson, who's a fantastic systems thinker, not the singer, he's sort of gone, but Michael Jackson from England has just released an article, and he's called it The Future of Systems Thinking. So as a special bonus for joining us today, as we get going, I'll probably pop that in the chat as well, so you can have an intellectual stimulation even after the meeting has closed. But to begin with, we've got the incredible Andrew Hawkins. For those that
Thanks, Brian.
don't,
Thanks, Brian. Brian
let's
has
go
a
give you a big
background.
breath.
I know, that's why I'm cutting you off, because you have a background in showbiz, so you like to make everything a production. But we here are a group of primarily evaluators interested in systems thinking. I think that's what will characterize us. We're often asked, what's the value of this intervention? And we're all sort of going, yeah, but it's intervening into a complex system. So what's the value of it in this system, that system? How does that work? How do we do our job of looking at things intervening in complex systems? We wrestled with this a lot. That's why we formed this group, because we want to wrestle with other people who are thinking about it. And mainly, I think we're mainly practitioners too, which is a nice aspect of this group. The question actually, I think, came from France, or one of France's book club people, that got transmitted to Brian and then to the group, which when somebody says, what does it mean to take a systems perspective in evaluation? And we thought, well, gee, that's a great question. How could we possibly provide a disarmingly simple answer to that? Thinking about someone who's been an evaluator who's been asked to do systems thinking. So what I tried to do anyway was just write it down in as jargon-free way as I could, just sort of thinking, well, how would I answer that? So this is just my straw man provocation. It's not meant to be an answer or anything other than loose organizing of thoughts around, having spent, I guess, quite a few years with these guys and others thinking about the problem. So I'm just going to quickly take through it. What I was really hoping to do in the time was I've sent the doc in a Google Doc, because anyone can open that and lots of people can edit it at the same time. And I thought it'd be really neat, to use an Americanism, really neat, it is Halloween, if people wouldn't mind adding edits, comments, suggestions, track changes on that document, and maybe we'll have a better document to share later with everyone as what's in there. So I'm going to start. Oh, and funnily enough, this wasn't planned, but Brian, I did just read that Michael Jackson article, and it's like the opposite of what I'm going to present. It's really in depth and intellectual and full of anachronisms and jargon and things. But I did wade through it and found it interesting in that his answer seems to be action research. So that's the end of this presentation. No, we've ended before we began. And I think, well, action research is something that I came across, and all of us have probably come across, and it seems like a very sensible idea. But it was very interesting to see at the end of all of the heavy theoretical papering that that seems to be where he's landed. He called it an epiphany he had at the beginning of the article. But anyway, so the first thing I was going to say is systems thinking is nothing new. It's been here forever. It's implicit in many indigenous worldviews and other ancient worldviews about how wholes exist. I feel like we got somewhat sidetracked by the Enlightenment in that period where we found a really good way of breaking things down into parts and understanding how they worked, and we used that to great extractive profit and understanding of how physical systems or physical things work. But we kind of made the mistake of thinking that was all there was to knowledge, this kind of science. And many thinkers and intellectuals in the 18th, 19th century sought to correct that, but the advances in the 20th century didn't stop it. And I think it's only now as the Gaia movement or the ecological stuff starting to come home to roost, people is starting to really, really be more seriously taken. But it's a difficult thing. And I think systems thinking is hard because in my head, everything that isn't the Enlightenment is systems thinking, more or less. So it's very hard to say what is systems thinking, because it's like, well, what is human thought and what is the human condition? And what is the ecology and the planet and what is God and religion and, everything. So I think it can become very hard very quickly. The basic idea, of course, of a system is the whole is more than the sum of its parts, which everyone would have heard in various different iterations, but it's about looking at the whole. And systems thinking often focuses on the relationships between parts and sees the value of the parts as to how they relate in terms of some emergent whole, so that the properties of the whole are not predicted by the parts. It's something new. And so trying to do a causal analysis on how parts lead to an emergent property is difficult. I think Russell Ackoff used the thought experiment of something like, how much does a steering wheel contribute to driving of the car? How much does a wheel contribute to the driving? How much does the bonnet of the car contribute? What's the independent impact of having a handbrake on driving? Silly questions we often get asked. So it's a different way of thinking. I think one thing that stayed with me a long time is the Cynefin framework, which is this idea that while there's a basic concept of a system as a whole, there are different kinds of systems. There are some relatively simple systems where you just need to understand how they work, and then you can solve an equation for X. What's the best size snow shovel to shovel snow was an example. And you can work that out. And once you've worked it out, you just repeat it. And shoveling snow becomes fairly simple to understand in a system of how to move snow. But most of the things that we look at are more complex systems. They're dealing with people in society. So we don't often have those other systems. But I think it's important to just not start with the thing, well, we must do systems evaluation and we must do a particular kind of systems evaluation. It feels like anything you want to start with, what's the situation you're in? What's the questions? What's your room to move? And what kind of system would you be in? The other thing I think that's really important in evaluation, which is important in all evaluation, not just systems thinking, is the role of values. And I struggle with this one a lot because a lot of evaluation seems to be sort of more scientific and focused on measuring outcomes rather than determining whose values matter. My controversial opinion on that would be that when there's no single agreed purpose for a system like the housing and homelessness system, if you want to call that a system or an ecosystem, it's very hard to say whose values matter. And to me, in a sense, that is politics. And it's very hard to get involved. And I think there's a whole nother realm of where evaluators might work in facilitating deliberative democracy and other forms of selecting what we value. But I find that one very hard. But once we've decided we're doing a systems perspective, I think, the number one thing you'll see a few times throughout this document is about being humble and about having humility about what you can possibly know about something. But I think I've written here, have boundless optimism about what you can achieve by collaborating with others. And I think that's one of the key insights for me about systems in this complex stuff. There's very little that we can do on our own, but so much that we can do with other groups. Often I talk, and it's an idea from Stephen Covey's thing about of highly effective people, the 7 Habits, very old book. But is that difference between your sphere of interest and your sphere of influence? And I think it's really important when you have an initiative that you're evaluating from a systems perspective to think about what can we actually influence with what the resources, time and energy we have, and how can we do that as well as we possibly can, rather than suffering under the yoke of trying to fix homelessness when that's something that's part of a bigger system, that's your sphere of interest, that's why you exist, but you don't have the power to do at that level. But the idea being the better you work on your sphere of influence, the bigger it grows, the more people that come in, the more likely you are to be able to deal with those bigger problems. But it means you need some discipline in a sense while you're always focusing on what you can do, while at the same time bringing as many people in as you can to help. A concept that I've used or talked about before, I think, other than this idea of who's in and who's out of your system, which is essentially a boundary question that I tried to answer pragmatically about basically your sphere of influence of the people who are willing to talk to you and work with you, and work with them first and do a good job of that before trying to expand out, is this idea of levels. And I think we often get caught as evaluators in the question of, well, what was the independent impact of this program on this high-level problem? It's a very difficult task. There are obviously methods that are designed to do it, but sometimes it might be more mature to say that we can understand the world by breaking it into levels, and we can't always go between the levels of. So, you know, the classic example would be physics, chemistry, biology. It puts the world into different chunks and tries to understand them on their own merits, but doesn't usually ask the question, how much did a change in an animal's attitude change the protons and chemical valence structures surrounding its head? Because these are questions that are answered at different levels of the system. And we know macro and microeconomics has sorted that out. They talk about you can't measure the amount of inflation that an individual firm creates. They don't try to do it. Somehow we get stuck trying to say what was the impact of this program on some bigger problem, because we don't have macro sociology and micro sociology. Or maybe we do, I'm just not aware of it. But this idea of like being content with seeing your level of the system that you're working on and doing as good a job as you can with what's in front of you, while all the while trying to build alignment with those around you who are focusing on the same thing, is kind of what I think is most important. I think, as I say that, it just sounds a lot like the Think Global, Act Local slogan from when I was a child. So actually, I think that is pretty much all I really wanted to say about it. I mean, to me, it comes down to being humble, avoiding hubris, and working hard at building alignment among allies. Because often the things that we're looking at, no single organization, agency, or anyone is in control. There are values that are competing, whether even about what the purpose of a house is. Different parts of the political system and different constituents value these things differently, and it's very hard for us to understand all of those. But primarily it's about realizing that your knowledge has a very short shelf life, and we can learn and often improve the thing that we are working on. And that was part of the Michael Jackson paper, and this is that he talks about, is that, and I think mostly the scientific tradition and most of the evaluation in the 20th century was focused on accumulating knowledge. Obviously, with the phrase "what works" is known to everyone, or even from a realist perspective, what works for whom and under what circumstances and how, trying to find causal mechanisms. But it seems almost unsaid that the goal of evaluation was accumulating knowledge, reusable, replicable knowledge. And I think what Michael Jackson's saying, as much as I understood it, it is a deep paper, and I think others have said, is that maybe the goal is not accumulating knowledge about what works, it's locally responsive knowledge that will help make improvements here and now, is as much as you can aspire towards, at least in terms of what the role of mainstream traditional evaluation might be. But that monitoring the health of the system at the different levels will be critically important for understanding what you should do, but it's not going to tell you what you should do. It will give you information of how the health of the system is running. So I think we're going to see, in my view, more monitoring, more deliberation, and less summative judgments of merit and worth. as a result. So I think that's all I wanted to say. We did just at the very last minute put a whiteboard together, and I don't use Zoom much, so I have no idea if anyone can see it. But we just, can anyone see it? Yeah, okay, good. I just stuck the Cynefin framework up there. It wasn't the intention to talk about any systems theory. I think much like psychological theories of behavior change, they often are iterations or riffs of essentially the same ideas. There's also, I put a picture that came from that Michael Jackson paper that Brian just mentioned, which was what his EPIC framework was. It's quite an interesting paper. I suggest you read it. It also helped make you feel you know a bit more about hard systems and soft systems and the whole history of systems, because this guy's deep, so it's a nice one to read. So Brian, I think that was what we wanted to do. And was there any sort of questions or clarification before we go into groups and start people talking amongst themselves about what do they see as their minimal distilled systems thinking ideas in evaluation?
Hey, look, Andrew, why don't we pick up some of the comments in the chat and throw it open to people live, which is very strange. Paula, do you want to jump in and ask your question to Andrew or your comment?
Yes, thanks, Brian. I think, so I read the paper quickly just beforehand, and I really appreciate your paper, Andrew. I thought it was really great. It really resonates with a bunch of stuff that I've been thinking about for a while. I guess I would call myself a proponent of complexity thinking and complexity thinking about the world. So I'm coming from a place where I do believe the world is very complex, and so that requires us to be complexity thinkers as humans, let alone evaluators. So I have always been interested in systems evaluation, but I'm certainly not an expert, and I haven't read all the books. So this was appealing to me from the perspective of being a complexity thinker. And the one point that I picked up in my question is that I absolutely agree that policy contexts are complex. Adaptive systems, they're moving all the time. There's lots of different factors influencing them, changing them. There are lots of different perspectives. There's the politics around that. People are having different thoughts and feelings about the things that are happening in government and policy in the world. So it is a bit of a moving feast, isn't it? So yes, that does seem to grate with some of the traditional forms that we use, like logic models, for example, boxes and arrows, things like that, rubrics, which are kind of set in place in a time and place and with particular perspectives that have influenced it. So I guess what I'm saying is the reason I asked that question is I think if the policy contexts that we work in are indeed complex adaptive systems, then our evaluation has to be fit for purpose for managing that reality. So I guess that's why I asked the question. So what does good look like for us as evaluators if that's our reality that a lot of us are working in every day? So that's one question. I also want to, I love the humility factor, Andrew, that you raised that point about how we are humble as evaluators. I think that's absolutely relevant. Many years ago, I did some work around, I was really interested in developmental evaluation, Michael Quinn Patton, and I did a paper looking at that and breaking it down. And where I got to was that I thought it was very much aligned with action research and participatory action research in particular. And it's interesting then, isn't it, that Michael Quinn Patton is also all about complexity thinking and the world being complex. So maybe Jackson's coming to a similar position that Michael Quinn Patton has kind of been in for a while and talking about for a while. And one last point, because I don't want to take over the whole hour, but you talked about levels and the kind of the tension around the levels, and and I think one thought I had about that is that one thing that I think sometimes is not done really well is when we have a logic model or a theory of change and we visualize that somehow, that oftentimes the assumptions between the various levels are not made particularly explicit, and yet when we go and do our evaluation work, we are surfacing those assumptions and finding out whether they are interrogating those assumptions and testing them. And so I wonder if, unpacking and making those assumptions really explicit can be helpful around that tension that we have with levels and, how they affect each other. So I'm going to stop there. But I hope
that's a lot. Yep. Well, there's many questions. I'll just try and pick the easy ones the ones I feel I can answer. I don't think I have anything particularly new or different to say about ethical good evaluation practice. So I think everybody has a view, and ultimately there's a personal aspect to what you see as ethical. But to your last point, when I think it flows through for me at least, like I realize I take a perspective as a Western educated white male who likes reasoning. I have a bias and a perspective towards logic and reasoning. Others might have a bias and perspective towards harmony and history and what elders say as sources of knowledge. So it's very, very difficult to give an answer. But for me, I agree about the assumption. Transparent reasoning is probably my simple answer I would have about that. I mean, I think fundamentally evaluation works by helping refine propositions for action, like deliberating. Should we do this? Should we do that? What makes doing that a good idea? So I've written quite a lot about how I think these ancient forms of deliberation to go back to the beginnings of democracy and deliberative democracy and arguing. So the ability to make an argument and clearly explain your reasons, which include your assumptions, is critical. But I realize in doing that, there's the potential for disempowering others that don't feel so comfortable with logic and argumentation. And if that's the thing of a good ethical evaluation, it could exclude people. I think actually humans are really good at reasoning, whether they're trained or not, when they're in a group together and they're unmotivated reasoning, with what Julia Galef in a great book called The Scout Mindset, she talks about a lot. Unmotivated reasoning. If you can put a group of citizens together to try to find the answer to something, it's amazing how good people are, trained, expert or not. So that avoiding the hubris of thinking you can work it out. So I guess what I'm saying is participatory decision-making and dialectic or discussion amongst people, ideally people with competing values. I don't know if it will work if people have radically different values. But yeah. Thank you, Paul. Glad you enjoyed it.
I will say some of the stuff that I've done in systems that helps me with those boundary questions is looking at Ulrich's work on critical systems heuristics, which is, I take what Andrew is saying about being humble is not believing that your perceptions or that your ideas are correct at any given moment, that you need to understand lots of different perspectives. And I think I've found at least the 4 levels that Ulrich uses in critical systems heuristic as a good way just to do a bit of a churn on stakeholder engagement. Don't know if that helps.
Brian, did you want to, should we maybe, it is Cynefin. I'm pretty certain it's Cynefin to that question because I did training with this guy, with Dave Snowden a few times. So I've heard him say it.
As well.
A few times, yeah. I think he was also a former Jesuit priest, if I recall that. Fun fact.
Right.
All right. Maybe we should, I think, because the best bit of all of these sessions is getting into groups and having a chat and meeting some new people. So can we do that, Brian?
Yeah. Just keep talking while maybe pick up some more comments on the chat, and then I'll set up the groups if that's okay.
I think.
Just gotta work it through it.
It's a great one here from Tracy Henderson about the difference between reality and what our brains can digest. And yeah, obviously we would all assume that our brains can digest a tiny fraction of reality. As I said, I think that's why it's good to have groups of people working on things, because you're picking up a bit more. The human brain's a pretty impressive organ when it's used as intended. Well, I don't know, intended, that gets into a different realm. But yeah, I think that's why I like to focus on, you want to focus on the bigger picture, the reason you're here, the thing that you know you can't fully understand, but then you can also look at the bit that you can influence or most control, and, you know, have a sense of duty about doing the best possible work you can on what you can do, and a bit of faith and trust that will help you connect with others and grow from there.
So, Andrew, does that mean that when we talk about levels, they're also abstractions? They're not real. They're just ways of us simplifying it for our brain.
Yeah, I think
to
so.
kind of have this shared understanding.
I think that's my short answer, yes. I'm sure there's some theory of grand unified theory of everything that the scientists will come up with that allow you to explain it, but maybe not because of quantum, you know, emergence and different levels. So I don't ultimately know, but it seems very useful. Humans have been doing it for a long time, trying to split things into chunks and understand the chunks rather than try to understand the entire sweep of everything, whether it's an organizing principle of the mind, as Kant would say, we're just born that way. Like he would say causality, we assume it's real, but maybe that's just the way brains are built.
So I don't find it useful for people just to say the system and the levels without explaining to me what they are in their head, you know, because it's most likely I'm trying to grasp what they're saying, but I've got something completely different in my head. And unless we're really explicit about that, then we're talking about very, very different things. Yeah. Because they are just frameworks that people are going to bring, and they've read different things and they're influenced by different writers or other backgrounds that they come from. And so it's a shorthand for our understanding of something. But unless we really know that person well, then we're not going to understand what they mean by this shorthand use of the word systems or levels, or there's probably other terms as well.
Okay, that's right. Okay, I'm going to push the breakout room button. I think I've got it, if you don't, Brian.
Yeah, I was ready, but you push it.
Okay. I'm going to put your question in, Brian.
Okay, great.
Well, looks like we're in a group of ungrouped people.
Yeah.
So, hello, everybody. Does anyone want to introduce themselves, say hello, maybe give some their thoughts about systems thinking and evaluation? Or maybe they've put their phone down for a minute and they're not actually there.
Yeah. And now they're actually caught out. No, there's some movement. There's now.
Okay. Thanks very much, Andrew, for your thoughts. Always very, very inspiring and interesting, and things to think about. I guess I'm just sort of mulling over putting it into context. So I'm working on evaluating health programs, and I guess maybe there's an interest by others to understand the value of those particular programs, but when you sort of have oversight of the various programs, or not even oversight, but various programs are happening. You can see it's a system, and just trying to, I guess, still sort of evaluate to a high quality and show the program is working, but not losing sight of all the other factors that are contributing to that, and then presenting it in a way that is of value to the people who are interested in seeing the evaluation. I'm not sure that's quite.
I'm not sure, but I'll comment on what I thought I heard, or at least something. Because it sounds like a common problem, and one that we didn't discuss at all would be if you're doing a range of different things to change a system, you're evaluating each one, but then you're going, well, what's the relationship? Like, how does it contribute, or which ones are most important would be a question I would have if I was in a health department going, I've got all these different interventions.
Yeah. And I guess, the people who are developing those particular programs, because different people are involved in different programs, they want to see the value of their program. But you can kind of see, having seen various programs, that of course they're all having some contribution in improving health outcomes. And so you want to kind of demonstrate that as well, that it might not, and also like one program just can't do it all either. Like, you need the various programs in place, working together, targeting different populations or different kind of health issues or different levels. Like if you're looking at prevention, tertiary care. And so, I guess it's just when you're sort of doing an evaluation of a program, but you don't want to lose sight of the bigger picture either, and you want to convey the findings within that broader system.
Absolutely, yeah. The bigger picture is the thing we're all here for, the reason why all these programs exist. That's kind of often at the top of your program logic, right? Like, it's the thing we contribute to but can't actually fully achieve. But if we're not logically aligned to it, what are we even doing? So there's the question then going, so you can see how your intervention aligns to the overall problem. One thing I'd say is interesting, though. There's a difference between a bunch of stuff and a system. So you can have like a bunch of programs that are all contributing to an outcome, but I wouldn't necessarily call that a coherent system unless you can actually demonstrate how they work together in concert to achieve an outcome. Because I think often what we have is multiple interventions that are all good. They're tackling different parts of the problem. That might be good, like whatever the healthcare situation is, you're checking doctors' attitudes, patient attitudes, the cost of medicine here. You're doing all these different things, all of them individually valuable, all contributing to an outcome. But at that stage, I'd say each thing needs to be evaluated on its merits, unless you've got a situation where you go, no, we see the root causes of this problem, and that's why we have this much of this one, that much of this one. That's why this one's going first, then that one's coming second. And you've mapped it out with feedback loops and things that I don't see done very often because it would be very intentional. But I think it's important to be honest about, do we have a collection of things that operate as a coherent system to deliver an outcome? And therefore we can turn down that one, turn up that one or more realistically, what we have is a bunch of things that are all good ideas and they're all pointed towards an overall outcome, but we don't really know exactly how changing doctors' attitudes will impact on the price of medicines. We're not thinking as a system engineer, and that's okay because that would be really difficult and take a lot of resources and time. But sometimes I think we're just not fully clear or honest or transparent with ourselves and others about like, well, actually, we know these things are all important, so let's make them all as good versions of themselves as we can, and that should work. And if it's not working because the system's getting worse, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing these things? Should we be doing other things? And that takes reasoning and thought and groups of people to discuss about what's feasible, what's a good idea. But it's very different to a finely tuned machine, which is a type of system like a car, right? And each part is important. You take out one, it won't drive. But anyway, I think I'm not sure if that was along the lines. Brian.
I came across something the other day which I should have known about, but I didn't. It's a framework called the multiple streams framework, which actually has a way of understanding how what you've just talked about exists within a political situation, in that people often have a whole lot of different solutions to a problem, and really the way the implementation or the policy that gets accepted is a product of temporal readiness at a particular time, so that politicians tend to take shelf-ready policies at a particular point in time. So if they've got a whole lot of policies that are easy and containable, then they take one or two of those. And I found that that framework helped me understand government a lot. It might be an old framework. I don't know.
Is that the garbage can model of public policy, Kingdon or something? I remember it.
No, it's called the multiple streams framework. So it's been applied to the NDIS just recently. Why that came into existence. It's can be applied to most situations. Well, it has been. I don't know.
It's the same. The model portrays problem solutions and participant decision makers as three independent streams.
That's right.
That are each generated separately and flow disconnected from each other. These three streams only meet when the fourth stream of choice opportunity arises as a garbage can for the streams to flow into. The mix of garbage streams in a single can, choice opportunity, anyway, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's that idea. We don't do rational public policy. We have different streams, things going on, and sometimes they intersect. And you have the policy entrepreneur that goes, we should do this. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but now I'm going to reframe it as a solution to the problem that's in the media. This is why we should have.
Yeah, but there is some rationality to it. There's rationality in the formation of a shelf-ready policy. Whether it's chosen or not is whether it sits in the garbage can, as you call it, at the right moment in time, at the right level of readiness.
I think I do hear some. I do think there is some desire to, have a more integrated approach and learn from everything that is being done and sort of bring it together. And I guess, we see that as part of our role too, is evaluating the programs, that we can take the learnings from the different programs and try to put them together in a more cohesive picture to inform policy. But it's when there's so much happening and just trying to pull it together in a coherent, organized way, that it's it's something we're still trying to do.
Yeah, and I guess I talked about the difference between ambition and what's in front of you right now. And I think that frustrates me is that the endless ambition. I think the phrase "what works" has been with us for so long, yet there's a very, very small repository of things that have been shown to work in a replicable sense when you're dealing with complex problems. So what I'm trying to balance is that ambitious and optimism of how are we going to do that, with reflecting on the reality that we haven't been able to always achieve it. So what can we do in the meantime while we're trying to do that? And that's what I'm thinking, is focus on what you can do well, do it better, make connections with others, and grow more of a bottom-up way. But anyway, we've all got a very partial, we've all got different experiences, right? We've seen different things.
Yeah.
Have you had any notable successes that you can think about, given the complexity of what you're facing?
Well, I haven't been in this particular role for very long, but I do see that the sort of talking to the different people involved in the different programs, I can already start to get a picture of a bit of what we call an ecosystem. And we still got to finish evaluations of some of these programs, but you can kind of see, well, this one seems to be working well, but we also need this other program that's sort of tackling it from a different angle. to also be occurring at the same time. So it's kind of nice to kind of see, at least in my mind, I can see how they sort of fit together and how they work together and how they're complementing each other. But just in terms of communicating that, yeah, that in a succinct way, that's hard.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's good. There's like different types of systems, and it's important not to just go systems as a concept, as though we all have the same idea of what that means. Like, I think, you know, there's a system within McDonald's for making a hamburger that's a very efficient system that can be optimized and has a single goal, which is the production of the hamburger. And we don't often exist in those kinds of systems, but there are cases, like Brian and I are quite aware of, worked, for example, in cardiac care in a remote community in the United States. And there was a system for what happens from the moment somebody drops from a heart attack to walking out of definitive care. And it's all about the patient transfer and the optimized decisions that you can make to go to the base hospital of the ambulance or the best hospital that would treat the person. And you can understand that as kind of a system that can be optimized because it's got a single purpose that everyone's based, more or less. Obviously, healthcare costs and charging and whatever, but more or less there's a single purpose that everyone can agree on. And it's like, we don't do something if it doesn't help the patient get to definitive care. We know that's what we're trying to do. But there are other systems or ecosystems where there isn't really an agreed purpose of it. It's just how all the parts have historically joined together and how we've as humans decided to call this a health system. Or as one systems thinker, Russell Ackoff, says, we don't have a health system. He's talking in the United States here. We have an unhealth system because it's actually evolved to create income for doctors more than it has to create wellness for patients, on his critique. And say that's how the system parts actually are. They're all designed to maximize the revenue for hospitals and health funds. So that's the dominant impulse, not patient well-being, which is pretty confronting, but he's a pretty amazing thinker. I encourage anyone to watch videos of Russell Ackoff. They're all old, from the 80s or something, but it's very interesting. Yeah, so is there a system that we all agree on what the purpose is and it's clear? Often, yeah, sometimes there's not. It makes it very hard. Like housing, as I said, is it investments class for mum and dad investors? Is it a roof over someone's head? Well, the lived experience is that it seems to be more of an asset class than basic shelter, because all of these policies have grown up to help it be a better asset class. And that's sort of the implicit value, is that the revealed value of housing is it's as much about an investment class as it is shelter. Anyway.
Yeah, that has some strengths and issues with it. I mean, and also politicians have a way of pointing at different things and creating, what did Paul Keating calls it? He calls it throwing a bomb in the water or something, creating a completely different idea about dealing with the problem, or a complete distraction. I mean, you know, ultimately, there aren't enough houses in support. There's a lot more people coming into the country, and there isn't enough houses being built.
No, but I would argue it's the simple thing is that older people aren't downsized because of stamp duty. The number of occupants per house is radically shrinking, yet we have the biggest houses in the world. But there's like 1.3 people in each house. Like, it used to be a lot more. Because anyway, without trying to solve the housing problem, everything is very complex. Should we go back? I think we need to go back there, Brian.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Thank you so much, Mel. Lovely to chat with you.
Lovely to chat with you, Mel. Are you going to bring us back, Andrew?
Okay, I will. Where we go? Let's see if I can close.
I'll go close all wraps.
I'm doing it. I think okay. Down.
So it's 57 seconds.
We do find like we do have an overarching goal of every program I've looked at. It's to improve patient outcomes, but even that is operationalized very differently across programs. So sometimes you talk about elderly populations, chronic disease versus prevention in early childhood. They're very different.
And the values of, putting more money into early intervention for children versus relieving chronic suffering for older people. How do you judge?
Yeah.
Values count, that's very difficult. That's why I think as evaluators, we can't make those decisions. We're not authorized. That's a political, in a democracy, those value judgments, for better or for worse, are baked into our system. As we're just talking about, how would you decide between the values of early intervention for young people with your healthcare budget versus relieving chronic suffering for older people in your healthcare budget? Both are great ideas, but who is it? I don't think it's our role to say which value is more important.
No.
It's very obviously not. You didn't either. I'm not saying you did, but I'm just saying it's one of those challenging things as evaluators staring at these values questions. It's like, it's not really our jurisdiction to answer that. That seems to me to be a political question. And the best we can do is make it very transparent that here we go. It's this. Like, someone can't just keep kicking the can down the road. Like, if we'd be more mature as a society if we owned it. But, oh God, that would be confronting a lot of inconvenient truths. Anyway, here we are, Brian, back.
Right. Welcome back, everyone. Does anyone have anything particularly that they want to chat about? Anyone want to report back on something incredibly interesting that they talked about within their group?
Yeah, we had a really interesting conversation in our group, Brian, and often these things are just too short. You only gave us a few minutes. We could talk much longer. But I'm really interested in the relationship between systems change and systems thinking. What are your insights on that? Because you can have one without the other. Well, anyway.
Well, systems thinking is, I guess, a way of thinking, expecting to see the value in wholes rather than isolated parts. But systems change is, I think it's more of a question about practice. So you've got the whole thing about evaluation is you've got theory and practice, or like in the world, there's science that explains how the world is, how systems operate, how psychological agency and sociological structure create the world, how do all of these things actually work? That's a whole thing. And then you've got the other side of things. Well, what should we be doing about it? What can we do about it? Which is very much a pragmatic question, or a question of power and resources. It's not a scientific question anymore. It's almost an ethical power. Like, they're very different domains, but I think you can use systems thinking in different contexts. But yeah, they're very, very different things, thinking in systems and acting in systems.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, in systems in evaluation, something that I do that I think people either use like the vibe of systems to influence what they do, or they actively try and describe a system. And I think it's more important to actively try and describe a system. So I would say, or a not system, as Andrew might say, but in a program logic, you've got generally activities leading to outputs. I find what really helps for me is to look at how the activities leading to outputs, why, how does that fit together, really? And some of the notions I use is, how does each of those activities create some kind of value to the outputs that you're doing? So in a business sense, it's called a value chain. So yeah, so I think a lot of people hide behind complexity by saying it's all too complex, I can't even talk about it. Does that answer your question, Julie, or doesn't?
I know, because I'm a complexity thinker, and so when you use the word "it's all too complex," you're using the word in a different way, just as a scapegoat, not meaning that it's an understanding of reality, a way of understanding the world.
And anyone else? Because Brian, Julie, and I will go on forever.
Yeah, let's give some space to others. I'll just check if there's any really good comments. Paula said, would it be fair to say that systems are themselves abstractions? I would say yes. And we need to be very transparent and humble about this. Yeah, a good way of putting it. I'd agree. France, would you agree with that?
Yes, I take a philosophical approach. I think everything's an abstract. We're all just trying to comprehend it. Just trying to think about what perspective your land would bring to this. And she's all about bringing a diversity of values and viewpoints together and creating shared understanding through dialogue. So connecting back with what Andrew was saying early on about facilitating deliberative democracy. Yeah, that's all I've got on the spot. Oh, I'll let you know if I think of something else. Brian, you were going to say something? You're on mute.
Your land is probably closer to what Michael Jackson was saying. It's more like an action research approach. We're just about to finish, everyone. So before we go, I did put the LinkedIn group for systems that you can join free of charge. And the thing that will give you is that we'll push notifications through that group. And also you can put up your brilliant ideas there. I'm not sure if you've got any closing comments, Andrew. I'll chuck to you in a second, but I'd like to thank Andrew. You put a lot of work in. It's always great to have your thoughts, and Julie as well, and everyone for joining us. Over to you, Andrew.
Oh, too short. I want to hear other people talk.
Yeah. Okay, everyone can keep chatting, but I'm just giving everyone on the lunch break the chance to jump out. So if someone wants to jump in on that conversation, go for it. Julie, do you want to repeat your provocation?
Just reading the message from Kathy. Mary Parker Follett refers to integrating difference to create new innovative solutions to problems. That sounds really interesting. Kathy, do you want to say some more about that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Mary Parker Follett was a very early thinker on participatory democracy, and also pretty much a systems theory, I would call her a proto-systems theorist because systems theory wasn't really a term the time she was working in the early 19th century. She used Gestalt theory, which was a systems theory precursor, kind of one of the, often where people say the idea of the whole is more than the some of the parts came from, but that's disputable. That's what some people take it back further. And she's great. She's kind of very practical, couldn't get a PhD because she was a woman at the time. But she talks about conflict. She talks about a lot of things, power and industrial relations and democracy, and but refers to kind of 3 different ways that you can deal with conflict. You could have, one person wins or one group wins and the other loses. The second way is that both parties compromise, or instead you take this really systems perspective, which is you kind of put your differences together, you thrash them out, you talk it through. So really generative, constructive conflict. And in the process, you create something new. So it's almost that idea you get from a system where you take parts, sort of existing perspectives and views and ideas, you bring them into relationship, and in the process create a whole new thing, a novel capacity, a novel thing that the parts don't have. So yeah, she's great and she's very quotable, worth having a read. I really like her final book or group of essays that were published after she died, was called Dynamic Administration, which is lovely as a public servant and some of the language we throw around now. And she was also the first person to talk about the concept of power with, and coined the term power with, as opposed to power over or power to. She's been rediscovered. She was forgotten because she was a woman, and and so it's been rediscovered in management theory and kind of the power theory literature as well. And I just throw in like power is really relevant because as Brian knows, we've been talking about this a bit, but power is actually, people think it's all sorts of like domination, oppression, but it's actually the capacity to achieve outcomes. So it's really power by definition is capacity to act to achieve outcomes. So very relevant to evaluation. Yeah, that's all. And Mary Parker Follett talked a lot about power. That was it. That's useful.
Kathy.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. That's really useful. And Timothy O'Connor's sort of got a provocative comment here as well. Maybe you'd like to speak more about that, Tim. I'm very curious what you're saying. You're saying that facilitating democracy, coherence and community among the parts is probably the better way of thinking about systems change versus evaluating, measuring and figuring out the causal inference between the parts.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. I'm on my mobile phone. My laptop just restarted. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
I was talking to my group.
Hear you.
Yeah, likewise, Julie. I'm sorry I can't see you, but yeah, now I think the values thing has been an interesting thing that I've been thinking about doing evaluations, and I think, yeah, just the importance of what's come up for me is the importance of the interlinks or interrelationships or the relational factors within the program that I'm evaluating, and me being part of that program as an evaluator, or when I go and I'm sort of immersed in it, I'm really seeing the importance of what I can really focus on is really my relationship with whoever I'm interacting with, and that's yeah. I mean, like I said, that this is what we're talking about. I feel like in many ways those relational things are the critical part of the system. We can't be measured. It'd be so difficult to measure the whole system or the different parts of the system, but maybe just focusing on those things, and it doesn't have to be a good relationship. It can be a bad relationship. Sometimes two things might not work out, but that's as long as there's sort of a coherence or sort of yeah, the system will take care of itself in that way. And I'm still sort of working out how to explain this in many ways. But as I'm hearing what everyone's talking about, that seems to be a thing that's come up for me. And I guess also as an Indigenous evaluator, thinking about really struggling with systems theory and the values thing it's really about, as an Indigenous evaluator, I belong to the system. I can't control the system, but as an evaluator, in many ways, I am controlling because I'm measuring, I'm trying to predict. And this is where I'm thinking about this, how maybe it's not about causal, trying to figure out what the causal links are and the inferences are, but maybe it is just about just trying to figure out whether things would, there's some coherence happening, and that doesn't necessarily have to be causal, I guess.
For what it's worth, Tim, I agree with you. I'll throw you as many academic articles as I can find to support your position if it ever helps. But just as a final thing, I just posted something that was very on point, Jane. I hope you don't mind, but Jane posted something on LinkedIn that was very interesting, and it was a very, very provocative, interesting article about how systems are devouring place-based change. And it was speaking to what you're talking about, Tim, about that desire for control and understanding. I think one of the phrases that I liked or quoted was that in the name of accountability, we have created an ecosystem that cannot evolve. We build frameworks so tight that nothing living can breathe inside them. Anyway, it was a really nice article, which I think would speak to what you were just talking about as well. Jane, any final comment?
Maybe that's the next lunchtime webinar, Andrew.
If we're going to go down the path of increasing provocation, let's do it. All right, I think we better let everyone go, Brian and Julie, but thanks everyone for joining us.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. That was fun for us. So I hope it was fun for you as well, and very thoughtful.
Thank you.